Many Georgians, and I'd say even many sort of post-Soviet people, especially the youth, when we were growing up, our dream was the American dream. And we somehow thought that the answer was the United States of America when it came to the values that we believed in. And to now find ourselves in a situation that I never really thought that I would see as an American, it's really heartbreaking.
This is Beyond the Scoop, a podcast from Harriman Magazine at Columbia University's Harriman Institute. I'm Masha Udensiva-Brenner. Can you please say your name and who you are?
Hi, I'm Tinatin Japaridze. I am the Director of Geopolitics at Anadir Horizon, and I'm also an alumna of Columbia University's Harriman Institute.
Welcome, Tinatin. It's so nice to see you. And you wrote a really beautiful essay for us for the latest issue of Harriman Magazine. And I'm wondering if you had to sum it up in just a few sentences, what would you say?
This really was a very personal essay for me because it's not only about my native country, Georgia, and a place that I have been covering as an analyst for a long time, but it's also about my friends and my family back home who are going through a very difficult period in time. And over the last few years, I've been watching all of this unfold from the other side of the world, living here in the United States.
Georgia, which was once touted by Western leaders as an example of democratic reform in the region, has been inching toward authoritarianism for years now. Since 2012, the country has been under the leadership of the populist and conservative Georgian Dream Party, whose founder, Bidzina Ivanishvili, is an oligarch who made his money in Russia in the 1990s. While the party started as part of a pro-Western, pro-democratic coalition, it gradually drifted into Russia's orbit and enacted the democratic backsliding we see today. This trend really escalated in the wake of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Some particularly big blows came in 2024 when Georgia's government enacted a version of Russia's foreign agent law and suspended its negotiations to enter the European Union. These changes kicked off a mass protest movement in Tbilisi that continues to this day. Tinatin wrote about it for Harriman Magazine. Can you tell us where you were when you first started watching the protests and what that was like for you?
So I was in Florida. It was Thanksgiving of 2024. And the protests kicked off at an alarming speed. It really happened overnight after the Prime Minister of Georgia announced that essentially Georgia would start backtracking on its EU aspirations and the whole accession process. That was extremely concerning, but I did not realize that within hours, people would just flood the streets of Tbilisi and beyond. And all of that I was watching on a television screen in my hotel room in Florida.
And your mom is still in Georgia, and I know you have a cousin there and a lot of other family. What did that feel like?
I was so terrified because I was worried about what was unfolding on the screen, not only from a geopolitical standpoint, but also as a Georgian who still has family and very close friends back in Tbilisi.
Can you tell us about your background and your relationship with Georgia?
I was born in Tbilisi toward the end of the Soviet period, 1984. And the last few years of the Soviet era were very interesting, and I actually do remember some of it. I have very, very vivid recollections, including that day that I saw on the television screen in our kitchen in Tbilisi when the Soviet flag was lowered for the very last time, and I saw the flag of independent Georgia.
The Soviet flag in Tbilisi went down in April 1991 when Georgia declared its independence from the Soviet Union. Tinatin was just 7 years old.
And I remember, even though I was very young, I asked my dad, what's happening and why is this such a big deal? It's just a flag, right? And I think that's when my curiosity vis-a-vis geopolitics and history was born, when he started talking me through that whole process that our country was going through.
The period following Georgia's independence left a big impression.
It's a very personal moment when you go to school as a first grader to your Georgian school, and they basically swap out your school book, your textbook, from one day to another and tell you that whatever we were teaching you thus far, it's all a lie. And when you're 6 or 7 years old, you don't realize what's actually happening, but you feel that it's something very important and life will not be the same.
You didn't stay in Georgia much longer after that. Can you tell us what happened?
So when I was about 9, just a couple of months after I turned 9, the civil war had already started in Georgia. So my parents decided to sort of weather the storm when we had no electricity, no heating. It was a dire situation, but they thought that it would somehow go back to normal. So they said, let's just go to Moscow for a little bit.
Tinatin's family left for Moscow in May 1993, a year and a half into the Civil War, which had ignited after a group of paramilitary rebels orchestrated a coup against Georgia's first democratically elected president, Zviad Gamsahurdia. The war ended in December 1993, just 7 months after Tinatin and her family left for Moscow, but the instability in Georgia continued.
The situation kept getting worse and worse, and all of our family and friends back in Tbilisi kept telling my parents just to wait it out a little bit longer. My dad was an architect, so he very quickly got a job. And that became my new life, and I realized that we would not be going to Georgia anytime soon. And I had to start my life anew as a 9-year-old with brand new friends, brand new school, brand new language also.
And had you grown up speaking Georgian then?
I grew up speaking Georgian at home, as was the case with a lot of my peers, sort of the millennials. We all understood, at the very least, Russian because a lot of television was still in Russian. So in a way, it wasn't difficult for me to acclimate myself. But at the same time, I had this inner protest when it came to speaking Russian when we moved to Moscow. Obviously, it wasn't about politics because I was a kid. I was 9 years old. But I was worried that somehow I would be giving up my identity as a Georgian if I started speaking Russian and started forgetting Georgian.
During that time, you started getting really into singing. Can you talk about that?
I genuinely don't remember myself in my childhood when I was not singing.
She even sang on Soviet television as a 2.5-year-old.
I sang We Are the World on Soviet television, and they made a music video, which was really rare at the time. That was one of my first memories of myself singing. So it was a very natural progression for me to go from doing this as more of a hobby to taking it seriously and embarking on a career.
Tinatin's career was a whirlwind. In 2001, at 17, she moved to the United Kingdom to become a songwriter. Then in 2004, she moved to New York.
I got a publishing deal offer as a songwriter that brought me here. It was an imprint of Sony Music, which sounded wonderful, but it all collapsed within just a couple of months because the company went bankrupt.
But Tinatin found a way to stay in the United States. She applied for and got a green card for foreigners of extraordinary ability. Soon, she was co-writing, then starring in, an off-Broadway musical called Matryoshka, a biographical story about the experiences of a Georgian-born, Russian-bred singer making a musical career in New York.
You say you really know me. You're not afraid to show me what is in your eyes.
That's Tinatin singing Is It True during a Matryoshka performance. It's a pop song you might recognize.
Only rumors are the only lies. Falling out.
Tinatin co-wrote it for Iceland's 2009 Eurovision Song Contest. It won silver
Is it true? Is it over? Did I throw it away? Was it you? Did you tell me you would never leave me?
You were workshopping this off-Broadway show, Matryoshka, and then what happened?
So the show was actually going really well. We workshopped it at Mikhail Baryshnikov's center. Things were looking really, really good.
But as the show was gaining momentum, Tinatin felt a void she couldn't ignore.
I felt that there was an intellectual gap that I was trying to fill. I was very curious. There were a lot of things that interested me about the world, not just politics, but broadly, beyond music.
In 2014, Tinatin applied to Columbia's School of General Studies. She was nearing 30 and had no formal academic background. In a turn of events that felt to Tinatin like a miracle, she got into the program and eventually had to make a choice between the show and school.
And what I ended up choosing, which surprised 99% of my friends and family, was school.
At first, Tinatin thought she would major in psychology, but then she took Kimberly Martin's class at Barnard College, Russia and the West.
And that changed everything. That course would determine the rest of my professional life and my career going forward.
Tinatin decided to focus on geopolitics, completing a master's degree at the Harriman Institute. There, during Alexander Cooley's Legacies of the Soviet Union class, the seeds were planted for her book, Stalin's Millennials.
So for my Soviet Legacies class, the paper that I wrote, it was on the legacy of Stalin and how it continues to color a lot of what my native Georgia is going through, and specifically how my generation, that is as far removed as possible from that period, from the Stalinist era, is still affected in some way, be it directly or indirectly, by a lot of those legacies and a lot of that trauma. My family was very directly impacted by the Great Purges, and my great aunt was one of the direct victims of Lavrenti Beria, the NKVD chief. So for me, it was deeply personal. So that class paper actually ended up becoming the main thesis that I later tried to argue in my book, Stalin's Millennials.
When she wrote Stalin's Millennials, which was published with Lexington Books in March 2022, Tinatin thought she was writing about a history that was far behind her.
It was more of a, here's how I think about all of this in hindsight. Thank God it's over. We can finally move on. And now let's just look at the implications and the repercussions for our path going forward. And if someone had told me a few years ago that we are going to see a lot of those tendencies in our politics today, I would have just told them they were crazy. But who knew?
And what's it like for the average Georgian living in Georgia?
I think Georgians in general adapt very easily. We're very flexible. We tend to somehow tune out, in the best sense of the word, from situations where we are powerless. That's both a blessing, but also a curse, because the problem is, on the flip side, that if you start accepting the current reality as a given, and you sort of say to yourself, well, it is what it is, and we'll just make do for as long as we have to, then you stop fighting and you give carte blanche to the regime. And that really worries me, because on the one hand, I'm very glad that outside of Rustaveli Avenue, where the protests are still ebbing and flowing to this day, that life continues in a way as normal. But of course, underneath that, there's absolutely nothing normal about the way that not just the system, but the day-to-day life has changed, and our way of thinking about the future has also changed a great deal.
Tinatin says that a sense of pessimism has become the new normal in Georgia.
One of the Soviet legacies that I think about very often in the current context is this sort of unspoken fear There are some of my compatriots that I talk to that are genuinely, and I understand why, of course, worried, if not scared, to talk about the current political situation because they could get a knock on their door. But then there are, of course, those, including Gen Z, whom I write about extensively in the Harriman magazine essay, who are very brave, who are very articulate, and who are very clear about both their message and the delivery.
While some Georgian millennials are old enough to recall the final days of the Soviet Union, and many have heard stories of Soviet purges from grandparents and other elders, the younger Gen Z cohort grew up with those fears much further behind them, says Tinatin.
They are very clear that this is not the reality that they signed up for. They will not accept it, and they are demanding real change. The problem is, of course, we're still wrestling with this system that we haven't quite managed to dismantle fully. So it's very hard for the generation that's younger than me to accept that we can't change things overnight. Just because we are able to travel abroad and we still have the visa-free travel to European cities, for example, as Georgian citizens, does not actually mean that we were able to acquire a lot of those political models and political systems from the West.
But, says Tinatin, even if change will not occur quickly, she thinks it's important for the protest movement to continue.
We only have one country, we only have one future. And if we don't continue demanding change, which every Georgian is entitled to, then we are essentially going back in time to that Soviet occupation, giving up our agency. And I don't think that we can afford to do that. And that's why I admire the Gen Z generation that is absolutely adamant to continue pushing forward. The fact that people are not giving up, even if it's not that sheer amount of people that you see in the street on your TV screen, that still tells me that not giving up means that motion is unstoppable at this point.
And as you watch what's going on in Georgia, the situation in the United States descends into authoritarianism deeper and deeper. What has it been like to move from one place to another that keeps falling into this trap?
Many Georgians, and I'd say even many sort of post-Soviet people, especially the youth, when we were growing up, our dream was the American dream. And we somehow thought that the answer was the United States of America when it came to the values that we believed in. And to now find ourselves in a situation that I never really thought that I would see as an American, it's really heartbreaking. But I think we're different in the United States compared to, let's say, for example, Russia or even Georgia to a degree. When we talk about legacies, it's that we still have rather strong, perhaps I'm being optimistic, but rather strong institutions in the United States. I know they're being tested by the day, but compared to what I grew up with in both Tbilisi and especially in Moscow, there were no institutions. I just hope that we don't set into this comfort zone where as long as I'm not affected and you're not affected, it's okay. That would be a death sentence for us.
When Tinatin wrote her essay for Harriman magazine last fall, she was working at the Eurasia Group as a geopolitical risk analyst. Since then, she's joined Anandir Horizon, a venture-backed predictive intelligence company focused on simulation-based analysis of geopolitical and market risk. Tinatin says its mission is to catch the next geopolitical crisis before it reaches the headlines, and to expose the hidden systems and subtle signals that drive escalation.
It's something that allows me to think both as an analyst and also someone who is very deeply embedded and very interested in how the global markets work, how geopolitics work, how decision-making actually functions, and when is it too late to make a decision? And when do you make the decision? What are the signals?
Thank you. It's wonderful to have you on and to see you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Scoop, a podcast from Harriman Magazine. I'm Harriman Magazine editor, Masha Udensiva-Brenner. The episode was written and produced by me and edited by editor-in-chief Ann Cooper. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. Until next time.